Hello F1 fans! Welcome back to the F1 Masters podcast brought to you by AUBG Daily. As usual, you're with me, Vasco, David and Harry, and today we're going to discuss the Japanese Grand Prix and the most interesting events from it.
Before we begin, we would like to thank Cometric for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. If you're interested in how media messages impact businesses and what changes a company's image, look for opportunities in the media analysis sphere because Cometric is the right place for you. You can check out their website in the description below.
We can begin with practice. Nothing much happened. The highlight, I think, was Logan Sargent's crash in FP1. Other than that, FP2 was affected by rain, and anyway, I think we can move on to the qualifying.
For the qualifying session, the most memorable thing that we saw was that one Stroll was out in Q1, and we saw Esteban Ocon going for a second consecutive week into Q2. But again, nothing really fascinating. We can highlight the most interesting thing being, again, 1-2 for Red Bull and not the best qualifying session for Mercedes. But overall, nothing that spectacular during the qualifying session.
Yeah, we can also mention that Charles Leclerc had a quite awful qualifying in P8. But yeah, we can just move on straight to the race. So in the podium, we had first place Max Verstappen back on top, second place Sergio Perez, and third place Carlos Sainz. The DNFs were Ricciardo, Albon, and Zhou. And speaking of Ricciardo and Albon, they had their race ended on the second corner of the race after a incident between the two. What do you guys think about the incident as a whole for both drivers?
Well, first of all, that weekend was awful, I think, for Daniel Ricciardo. All the rumors that we heard in the past few weeks about his seat in RB not being secure and Dr. Helmut Marko thinking of replacing him. At the beginning of the season, we were talking about possible return of the Aussie at the Red Bull seat. And right now, after only a few races, we don't really see anything spectacular from him. And we can see him out only after 6, 7, 8 races. And talking about the crash, I think, Ricciardo was at fault. Alex Albon, it was a bit naive, in my opinion, to try and overtake him when it was visible that Ricciardo was not going to move. But again, Ricciardo, that he didn't look at the back and he had some space on the left. So I think he could have managed to do better with that situation. And Yuki Tsunoda beat him in the qualifying session and entered Q3. And in the end, Yuki Tsunoda managed to get 1 point in his home Grand Prix, stating that this is his team and he's the team leader now. So I think Daniel Ricciardo is at very, very low point and I don't really see how he's going to escape it.
I agree with your opinion. We can move on, I think, to the restart of the race was pretty boring, except that the Alpines made contact, and this didn't help them at all. Their car is really slow, and their drivers are not doing that well. And we have to mention Yuki Tsunoda's impressive overtakes at the S-turns. I think that this was one of the highlights of the race, honestly, because the replays were just amazing. And also Logan Sargent's going off track, which was his second of the weekend. I don't know what's going on with this driver, but he shouldn't have been kept by Williams, I think.
Yeah, just going back to the starts, both starts, the first start and the restart, were almost identical. No position changes at the front whatsoever. Everyone seemed to take it quite cautiously, and it just seemed like nothing was going to happen this race. And the only way people changed places was pretty much down to strategy. And we saw the likes of Charles Leclerc going for a one-stop, which no one else tried, and that greatly benefited him, moved him well up the order, and was in the fight for the podium spots, just didn't have the pace to keep his teammate behind. But overall, very, very not even average, not even mediocre race. Extremely disappointing race. Such a small amount of overtakes. You mentioned Yuki Tsunoda's impressive moves. But apart from that, there wasn't really many standout battles.
As we were talking before we started recording, actually in the past few years, we see this as a trend, and I think the Japanese Grand Prix this year was the culmination of that thing that most pilots try to be super cautious, super safe, and teams try to not be super abstract with their strategies, and in the end the fans, they receive really boring race, and we know what is going to happen after 5 or 6 laps. And yeah, I want to congratulate Ferrari on a great strategy. Although the execution was not the best, they still managed to capitalize on that strategy and managed to secure third and fourth place. But despite that, I think there wasn't anything amazing, anything that was catching the eye during the race, and I think there should be some thinking actually regarding that problem, because we see almost similar races every week, and I think that is really, really bad for the sport.
I agree. I also feel like no one wants to gamble or take any risks because they're afraid to lose their places. But one rule change that they made a couple of years ago, which I never agreed with, was allowing everyone to start on a free set of tires. Before, it used to be the top 10 locked in on the tires they had in qualifying. And this actually, it allowed for people starting outside the top 10 who maybe didn't have a good qualifying to compromise by doing a different strategy. And you would see so much variety, especially in the midfield. You had no idea who was going up. And maybe nowadays it wouldn't really make much of a difference, since the gap between the top 5 teams and the rest is extremely big. But I think like rule changes like this is what hindered different strategies and kind of making everyone on the same page in a sense.
And moving on, I want to mention also Mercedes and their poor qualifying session, in my opinion, and again, poor race. What do you think is happening with that team? Do you think that Lewis Hamilton is thinking only about the red car of the next year, or he's simply doing his best, but the car is not allowing him to perform better?
When compared to Russell, I think he is not doing his best, as Russell again outperformed him this weekend, and he is indeed probably concentrated on his plans for next year. And the car is just awful. I mean, it's slower than the McLaren's, as I was expecting before the season, even though some people weren't on the same opinion. But it's not going well, and the team is just struggling a lot.
Quick shout out to Fernando Alonso, because I think that Aston Martin is not that good, but Alonso is managing to do a lot better than the capabilities of the car. And compared, it may be because of his teammate, and that one Stroll is actually not giving his best performances. But again, I think Fernando Alonso is the only thing that keeps Aston Martin in that consideration of top 5 teams.
I don't think Mercedes were as bad as it looks. I mean, yes, they did finish, I guess, towards the bottom half of the top 10. But, you know, you look at qualifying, the gaps are extremely close between everyone. And Lewis Hamilton even out-qualified Charles Leclerc. They also finished right on the back of Piastri and Alonso. Russell even passed Piastri. I think they're there on pace. Maybe it's just they need that little bit more. It is extremely close, but maybe something with strategy they could do to jump the other teams. I could definitely see it. They're right there. And I think Lewis Hamilton, yes, I think he is thinking about Ferrari. He's been thinking about Ferrari before the season started. That's how much he doesn't like this car, if he made that decision before he even jumped into a race. So I think Lewis is just going to ride this one out. Not really impressive whatsoever. He was a completely different driver almost last year. I don't know what has happened. Where is his pace gone? I guess he's really just done with the whole team.
I think the same. I think he's not as motivated as he was last year, and I think it's really understandable. I just quickly again want to mention that Red Bull, this was again a dominant weekend for them. 1-2, very, very dominant. 1-2 in qualifying. And we saw that Leclerc and Fernando Alonso and Lewis Hamilton, their comments through the radio in the qualifying session, they were like, how is it possible for a car to be that fast. And in the race, they didn't have any problems. Max Verstappen, although his problems in Australia, he redeemed himself, 26 points. And I want to mention something also, and this is Carlos Sainz and his extraordinary form since the beginning of the season. What do you think is the right team for him? Where should he go? Because with that form, I think he can be a great asset to all of the top teams.
I think every top team would want him. He's continuing to, I guess, increase his value on the market. Red Bull, Mercedes, it doesn't matter. I think they both would like him. What should he go for? If he wants to challenge for the title, especially instantly, Red Bull is the place to go. Although you are driving against Max Verstappen, best driver in the world, and someone that beat him to take that Red Bull seat, I'm sure that he still has that on his mind. Mercedes, I would say that the competition is less and maybe it can allow him to, I guess, build himself up as the lead driver there, help push that car further. But I just feel like his back is up against the wall and it just seems like he's kind of going all out. It's completely different Carlos Sainz to what we have ever seen. This is the best he's ever looked in his entire career. I think that whatever team that he goes for, I think it should be either a Red Bull or Mercedes. I think Audi is too long-term of a project for him, and I think he's coming up to 30 years old. I could be wrong. So he doesn't have a lot of time. If he wants to win, he's got to go for a team that will deliver right now.
I think the same, and he can have that middle section in his career, racing for Mercedes, for example, for 1, 2, 3 years. And if he sees that things are not happening his way, I think he can switch to Audi if he sees some bright future with them. But for now, I think Mercedes may be the most suitable option for him.
I would agree. I would be glad if he joins Mercedes, even though they're also considering Kimi Antonelli as a replacement for Hamilton. And I'm curious to see what their choice is going to be. I think we can move on to the fun rubric. I'll start with my highlight of the weekend, which is Yuki Tsunoda. He did his best. I mean, he maximized everything. He was best of the rest. He pulled off some awesome overtakes, and I think that David agrees with me.
Yeah, I do. I mean, in general, there wasn't really many highlights of the weekend, if any at all. It was such an uneventful race, but Yuki Tsunoda, best of the rest, gets a point in his home Grand Prix. Really got the job done when Ricciardo didn't.
I have something similar, but I will formulate it as the difference between both drivers at RB. And this weekend, as I already mentioned, we saw the difference and we saw how Yuki Tsunoda established himself, or has already established himself as the lead pilot in that team. And I think that was like the final nail in the coffin of Daniel Ricciardo's career in Red Bull. We can move on to our surprises and disappointments of this really boring weekend, I can say. And I'll start. I was surprised by Ferrari's strategy. Although the execution was not the best, they managed to maximize and they took third and fourth, and Leclerc with great strategy, great performance, although he had poor qualifying session, he managed to redeem himself. And again, Carlos Sainz with impressive drive, third place, another really impressive race for him since the beginning of the season. And I can say that the disappointment was the crash between Daniel Ricciardo and Alex Albon, primarily because of them and what they had to prove in this race. Daniel Ricciardo, I already spoke about him, but about Alex Albon, his last weekend was not the best because he crashed his car and had these problems with Williams, and this was the weekend where he had to show he's alright, and that was a one-time incident and all that stuff, but he crashed in the first lap 2 out of 2 races, and having this serious of a crash, I think it's not that serious for his reputation, but for sure, if he wants to get to better team, this is not what he wants the teams to see.
My surprise of the weekend is also Ferrari's strategy, kind of mentioned it, but Leclerc managing to jump up so many places and be in the fight for the podium. And Carlos Sainz, he actually, when he came out of his last pit stop, he came out in 7th, and he had to make some overtakes, and he got the job done. He had really strong pace and was close to getting the fastest lap even. I think Max got it right at the end of the race. Overall, nothing more Ferrari could have done. My disappointment is Lando Norris because he had a great qualifying. He was at least 2/10 ahead of the rest of the, I guess, Ferraris, Mercedes, Alonso. And I expected him to have really strong race pace as well and honestly solidify that third place. But his strategy was so weird. He made a second pit stop when Leclerc made his first, and that cost him. He ended up being stuck behind Leclerc for the rest of the race. When Sainz caught up on fresher tires, there was nothing he could do. And overall, his pace was just kind of disappointing, and I think fifth place is not really satisfactory for McLaren.
My surprise is Sergio Perez, as he was second in qualifying and the race, and he was closer to Max this time. And my disappointment is Mercedes, as another poor weekend, as David said. They're close on pace, but not close enough. They have to do something better.
And I quickly want to mention again the final lap incident, that there wasn't an incident actually, but it was super close between Russell and Piastri. And I think Russell should be a bit more cautious in these turns, because we have seen this a couple of times throughout his career, and especially in Mercedes. And I think he should be a bit safer when doing things like that.
I completely agree. And we can move on to our predictions. I'll start. My first one is both, because I think that Ricciardo will beat Tsunoda in China. And this is based on the fact that Ricciardo won there in 2018. He has a lot of experience and Tsunoda has never raced there. So let's see. And the second one is that there is going to be at least 5 DNFs, which hasn't happened in a long time.
I think for sure Daniel Ricciardo will need a very strong weekend, but I'm not sure that he's going to do it. And that is why my prediction is crash within the top 5 teams, or I can even say within the top 4 teams. Something like McLaren with Mercedes or Red Bull with Ferrari, something like that, something spicy, something interesting. And the other, which is the boldest prediction I can say, is that Logan Sargent is going to reach Q2.
My predictions, I have Lewis Hamilton beating George Russell for the first time this season. This may have not seemed like it would be bold before the season, but now it most certainly is. And both Alpines into Q2. I think they're, even though, yes, they're quite bad, I think they've slightly improved compared to Bahrain, and it seems like they're moving slowly but steadily up. And also want to point out that no one got a prediction right for Japan. Vasco came very close with a Grand Slam for Verstappen, but unfortunately for him, Charles Leclerc decided to pit a few laps later. But yeah, this is our Japanese Grand Prix review. This is all for today from us. We're looking forward to the next episode. Till then, like, subscribe, and follow us in AUBG Daily on Instagram and Facebook. And stay tuned for more of our content. Thank you, and remember,
if you no longer go for a gap that exists,
you're no longer a racing driver.